Why does Santa Claus come down the chimney? Santa Claus, as we know him today, has only existed since the 19th century, and he first slid down the chimney in an 1812 book by Washington Irving. But the fireplace served as a venue for magical visitors long before Santa Claus. During the 15th century, the French scholar Petrus Memoris became concerned about a widespread belief that witches could pass through solid objects like walls and closed doors in order to enter homes. Believing Christians were granting too much power to the occult, Memoris offered a practical explanation: witches, elves, and the like simply entered via the chimney. This idea gained widespread cultural currency. In Renaissance-era fairy tales, fairies appeared via chimneys, and during the same period, witches were said to fly up their chimneys on broomsticks to attend Sabbath meetings. Throughout European folklore, the hearth and chimney act as a liminal space connecting the natural and supernatural worlds. According to legend, many supernatural creatures exploit this special intermediary space to enter homes, for good or ill. Scottish and English legend feature the brownie, a household spirit that aids in domestic tasks, but only at night, and enters and exits via the chimney. In Slovenia, a shape-shifting fairy called the Skrat brings riches to human families who cultivate his favor, flying down the chimney in a fiery form when delivering money. According to Celtic lore, a nursery bogey called the Bodach sneaks down chimneys and kidnaps children. Some chimney-traveling spirits appear specifically during the winter holidays. In Greece, goblins known as Kalikansaroi slip down the chimney to wreak havoc during the 12 days of Christmas. Italy's La Befana, sometimes called the Christmas Witch, delivers gifts the night before Epiphany, leaving her presents in shoes set by the fireplace. While La Befana wasn't making widespread deliveries in the early United States, other mythical holiday gift-bringers were. Pelsnickel, also called Pelsnickel, Belsnickel, or Belschnigel, traveled among German immigrant communities in 19th-century Pennsylvania, scaring naughty children and rewarding good ones. This whip-wielding wild man was a bit more intimidating than jolly old Santa Claus, but he served a similar purpose. According to a December 19, 1827 issue of the Philadelphia Gazette, he is the precursor of the jolly old elf, Christkindl, or Saint Nicholas, and makes his personal appearance dressed in skins or old clothes, his face black, a bell, a whip, and a pocket full of cakes or nuts. It is no sooner dark than the Belschnigel's bell is heard flitting from house to house. He slips down the chimney at the fairy hour of midnight and deposits his presents quietly in the prepared stocking. Pelsnickel comes from the German word Pels, meaning hide or fur coat, and Nickel, meaning Nicholas. Literally, furry Nicholas, Pelsnickel was a forerunner to the American Santa Claus and a mythical companion of the same ancient saint. While the character of Santa Claus draws from numerous mythical sources, his namesake is Saint Nicholas, the 4th century bishop of Myra, which was an ancient town in what is now Turkey. In the most famous tale involving Saint Nicholas, the bishop anonymously delivers bags of gold to a poor family to use as dowries for their daughters, keeping the father from selling the girls into prostitution. Early versions of the story have the saint tossing the money through the window, kind of appropriate, given that St. Nicholas lived during the 3rd and 4th centuries, about 900 years before the chimney. But as the story changed over time, St. Nicholas began dropping the gold down the chimney. A 14th century fresco in a Serbian church actually shows the chimney had become part of the legend by the early Renaissance period. Thanks to his generous dowry gifts and a host of miracles, including resurrecting a group of murdered boys who had been chopped into pieces, St. Nicholas became the patron saint of children, and his feast day was associated with special treats for the little ones. By the 16th century, it was tradition for Dutch children to leave their shoes on the hearth the night before the feast of St. Nicholas. They would then wake to find the shoes filled with candy and presents, which they believed the saint had lowered down the chimney. Though Catholic saints were renounced during the Reformation, St. Nicholas stayed popular in the Low Countries, even among some Dutch Protestants, and Dutch settlers brought their traditions to North America. The name Santa Claus is actually an Americanized version of the abbreviated Dutch name for St. Nicholas, Sinterklaas, but Dutch colonists did not really popularize him, since most of these were Sint-Averse Reformation Dutch, and their influence waned once New Amsterdam became New York. In 1809, it was writer Washington Irving who helped spark an interest in St. Nicholas when he featured the saint in his satirical Knickerbocker's History of New York, which poked fun at antiquarians, obsessed with the city's Dutch heritage. In an expanded version of Knickerbockers published in 1812, Irving added a reference, the first known, to St. Nicholas rattling down the chimney himself, rather than just dropping the presents down. It was the famous poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, that really popularized the idea of Santa Claus tumbling down the chimney. Initially published anonymously, the poem first appeared in print in 1823, and it wasn't until 1844 that Clement Clark Moore, a professor of Hebrew and Oriental languages at a Bible college, claimed the work, though some folks still dispute his authorship. The poem features Santa Claus descending down the chimney with a bound, then rising up the chimney after delivering his gifts. The poem started to be published annually in newspapers and magazines. And the illustrator and political cartoonist Thomas Nast cemented its vision of Santa Claus with his drawings of a plump, cheerful, bearded man delivering gifts in a sleigh. Millions of American children came to believe that Santa Claus slid down the chimney to deliver their presents. But what does Santa do if there's no chimney? As coal and wood stoves took the place of open fireplaces in many American homes, a parallel tradition developed. Santa squeezed down the stovepipe. By 1857, this image was common enough that the New York Times referred to it as a given. It might sound a little ridiculous to imagine the portly gift-bringer somehow stuffing himself into a 6-inch stovepipe, but during the mid-19th century, Santa Claus was envisioned differently in one key way. He was miniature. In his poem, Moore calls Santa a jolly old elf, suggesting his size is elfin. He is a little old driver in a miniature sleigh with 8 tiny reindeer. He has a droll little mouth, and it's his little round belly that shook when he laughed, like a bowl full of jelly. Illustrations from the time, including many of Nast's drawings, show a miniature Santa who actually needs to stand on a chair to reach the stockings on the mantelpiece. But while this elfin Santa could slide easily down the chimney, even he would have difficulty squeezing through a stovepipe. In published letters to Santa, some children inquired about his method of entry. Do you crawl down stovepipes? Of course, Santa Claus is magical, so while children may have been curious about the practicalities involved, it wasn't a barrier to belief. One boy told Santa confidently in 1903, "I watch for you every night in the stove." Adults, though, were not as sanguine. In 1893, Harper's Weekly published a worried opinion piece about the decline of Santa Claus. The stovepipe made it harder to believe in Santa, the author observed, but the rise of steam radiators and hot air heating made it essentially impossible. We know of no contemporary personage who is suffering more from allowing himself to drop behind the times than our friend Santa Claus. The downward course of Santa Claus began with the introduction of the cast-iron stove. As long as the old-fashioned fireplace lasted, he was secure. As the children gathered around this romantic old fraud, toasting their toes while their backs gradually but surely congealed, the story of Santa Claus and his chimney-descending habits seemed entirely probable. There was scarcely a single stumbling block for faith. But after the arrival of the comfortable, albeit unromantic stove, when the child was told of Santa Claus, he simply looked at the pipe and put his tongue in his cheek. Still, he tried to believe in him and succeeded after a fashion. Then, even the stove disappeared in many households, to be succeeded by the steam radiator or a hot air hole in the floor. The notion of Santa Claus coming down a steam pipe or up through a register was even more absurd than the idea of his braving the dimensions of a stovepipe. Now it occurs to us that all this might have been avoided if people had had the wisdom to keep Santa Claus up with the times. When the airtight stove was introduced, a mode of ingress, other than the chimney, should have been provided. This author really needn't have worried. Americans were not about to let Santa Claus disappear from cultural memory. Indeed, as the 20th century dawned, he became only more popular as businesses enlisted him for copious advertising campaigns, like the famous 1930s Coca-Cola ads, designed by Haddon Sundblom.